Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into, well, a true American classic. Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah, it's a novel that really continues to provoke and, illuminate, set on and around the Mississippi River just before the Civil War.
And our source material for this is a really detailed analysis of the book. It looks at the plot, characters, themes, the whole historical context, really gets into why this book, published way back in 1885, is still such a big deal.
Exactly. This analysis, it's a rich guide. It helps us understand not just the story, but, well, the world Twain was writing about, especially that post-Civil War Reconstruction era, and the really complex, sometimes pretty uncomfortable ideas he was grappling with.
Right. So our mission here for this deep dive is to pull out the most important stuff from this text, helping you, our listener, get a really solid handle on why this book matters so much without, getting bogged down in every little detail. We'll follow Huck's journey, look at the folks he meets, and sort of unpack those big, messy ideas. Twain tackles freedom, hypocrisy, what it actually means to grow up, especially in a society that's, well, deeply flawed.
And yeah, given some of the topics here, like slavery and racism, which are obviously very sensitive, we're sticking purely to how they're presented and critiqued within the analysis provided. Twain himself, writing after slavery was abolished, used that pre-war setting to really critique the racial injustice and hypocrisy he still saw all around him. So we'll focus on how the source explains that critique.
Okay, sounds good. Let's jump right in.
Yeah.
So where does this whole thing kick off? We meet Huckleberry Finn picking up right after Tom Sawyer, right? Where they found all that gold.
That's the one, suddenly rich. And Huck's living with the widow Douglas and her sister, Miss Watson.
And they're trying to, what's the word, civilize him.
Exactly, civilize. That's what the analysis calls it, trying to make him fit into society's mold. But Huck, he just hates it, finds their whole life dismal, regular, and decent.
Yeah, all these rules that seem totally pointless to him, like praying over food or getting worked up about Bible stories.
Yeah.
About dead people, as he puts it.
It feels like a cage, doesn't it? Even though it's supposed to be good for him. And, right from the start, Huck has this pragmatic view of things. The analysis points out he already gets that people lie, and sometimes, he thinks it's even okay.
That's interesting. Sets him apart early on.
Yeah, it foreshadows the whole moral journey he's about to go on, and that journey gets a serious jolt when his father, Pap, shows up again.
Oh, Pap. He sounds, well, awful based on the analysis.
No.
A vicious drunk, deeply racist.
Absolutely. And he hates everything Huck's gained, the education, the chance to move up a bit. All Pap wants is that money Huck found.
Right. He sees Huck improving himself as putting on airs.
Exactly. Putting on airs over his own father. And the analysis really highlights this one specific racist rant Pap goes on. Furious that a mixed-race man could be educated, wealthy, even vote.
Wow.
It shows how Pap defines his own pretty low social status against black people. He feels threatened if anyone he thinks is beneath him does well.
And then he just kidnaps Huck, takes him to some cabin.
Yeah, across the river, this isolated cabin. And the analysis makes a really powerful point here. Huck being locked up, beaten, terrified by his father. It's presented as really analogous to slavery, another way of being held captive, based on someone else's twisted idea of ownership.
Wow. Okay, so how does Huck get out of that? That sounds terrifying.
Well, this is where Huck's practical smarts really kick in. He comes up with this plan to escape. Pretty grim, actually. He fakes his own death.
Oh, right. The hog blood. I remember that part. Makes it look like he was murdered, covers his tracks, finds a canoe, and boom, he's off to Jackson's Island.
Exactly. Pure survival instinct. Freedom calling.
And then on the island,
Yeah.
he's not alone. Nope. He finds Jim.
Jim, who the analysis says is enslaved by Miss Watson, right? Why is he there?
Well, Jim overheard Miss Watson talking about selling him down to New Orleans for $800.
Wow. $800 was a lot back then.
A huge amount. And Jim was terrified he'd be separated from his wife, his kids, forever. So he ran.
So they're both runaways then, both looking for freedom, just different kinds. What's Jim like, according to the analysis?
Well, he's shown as superstitious, sure, but also really intelligent, deeply committed to being free, and incredibly selfless. The analysis actually suggests he becomes a kind of moral guide for Huck, almost like a father figure spiritually.
But Huck, having grown up where he did, he must have struggled with finding Jim, right? Society's view and all that.
Oh, absolutely. He's torn. Everything he's been taught tells him to turn Jim in. That's the right thing. But his gut, his empathy for Jim is pulling him the other way.
And he makes a promise. He does. Promises not to turn Jim in, even though he knows people will call him a low-down abolitionist. The analysis points out the huge irony there. Helping someone escape slavery is seen as this terrible, awful thing in that society.
That conflict inside Huck is just so central. And Jim says something pretty powerful about his own situation, doesn't he?
He does. Jim says he feels rich now because he owns himself and he's worth $800. The analysis really focuses on this, how Jim uses the language of the slave economy, that horrific monetary value, to show just how absurd and morally bankrupt the whole system is, valuing a person like property.
So they leave Jackson's Island, head out onto the Mississippi. The analysis calls the river itself a symbol of absolute freedom.
Yeah, it's where Huck feels most like himself. It's literally the path south towards potential freedom, but also metaphorically, it's this flowing, unpredictable space away from all those rigid rules on shore.
And the raft. Is
Right.
that symbolic too?
Yeah, the analysis sees the raft as representing a sort of necessary limit on that total freedom. Like, you need some rules for peaceful coexistence. On the raft, it's simple. Respect each other, support each other. A huge contrast to the nonsense on shore. Huck even says his happiest days were right there, on the raft with Jim.
Sounds almost idyllic, that raft life. But the dangers from the shore keep creeping in, don't they?
They sure do. Like, early on, they find that floating house with a dead body inside.
Oh, yeah. And Jim stops Huck from seeing the face.
Right. Turns out later, the analysis tells us, that was Pap's body. Jim was shielding Huck from that.
Wow. Jim's already protecting him.
Yeah.
And Huck still has to go ashore sometimes, right? For supplies.
He does. And there's that bit where he dresses up as a girl, Mrs. Judith Loftus, to get news. Shows how adaptable he is. And that's when he finds out slave hunters are after Jim, looking on Jackson's Island. That pushes them to get moving downriver.
Right, right. And what about the snakeskin thing?
Yeah. Huck plays that prank on Jim with the dead rattlesnake, even though Jim warns him it's bad luck. And then, wouldn't you know it, a live snake bites Jim, lays him up for days.
So the superstition was right.
Well, the analysis kind of suggests the real bad luck isn't the snakeskin. It's the constant danger they're always in because of the society they're trying to escape. Danger is always around the corner for them.
Okay, let's talk about some of those moments on the river itself that really mark a shift in Huck. The fog scene, that's a big one, isn't it?
Huge. Huck plays this mean trick on Jim after they get separated in the fog, pretends it was all a dream Jim had, very Tom Sawyer-like, really childish.
And Jim's response, it's powerful.
It really is. Jim realizes Huck lied, and he's just heartbroken. He tells Huck, my heart was most broke because you was lost. He wasn't worried about the raft. He was terrified for Huck.
Oof, that must have hit Huck hard.
Absolutely. He feels deeply ashamed. And this is key. According to the analysis, he apologizes to Jim. The first time he apologizes to Jim, a black man society considers property. It's a massive step. He's starting to see Jim as fully human, with feelings that matter.
So, as they head further south, closer to where they think the free states are, that internal battle flares up again for Huck about turning Jim in.
Oh, yeah. His conscience, the one society gave him, is yelling at him, telling him it's the Christian thing to betray Jim. But his heart, his bond with Jim just won't let him.
And then they actually run into slave hunters.
Right on the river. They ask Huck straight up if there's a black man on his raft. And Huck, the analysis describes him struggling. The words wouldn't come out. He just cannot betray Jim.
So what does he do? He lies, right?
Instantly. Quick thinking. Says the man on the raft is his pa, sick with smallpox.
Brilliant. Scares him right off.
Totally. And the analysis points out something interesting about the hunters, maybe not purely evil, but their conscience is so warped by slavery that they value property or fear disease more than anything else. It reveals the society's warped values.
So what does Huck take away from that close call?
This is a huge moment for his moral development. He realizes he felt bad both ways, thinking about turning Jim in and after lying to save him. So he figures that conscience society gave him. It's not reliable.
Okay.
So he decides it's easier to always do whichever come handiest at the time. The analysis argues this isn't laziness, it's Huck deciding to trust his own gut, his instincts, his heart over society's messed up rules. A major step.
Okay, so the river offers some freedom, but these encounters on shore, they just keep showing how messed up civilization is. Hypocrisy, cruelty.
They're like the steamboat wreck with the robbers. These guys are actual criminals, not like Tom Sawyer's games. But even they have this bizarre moral code, right? They won't shoot a guy, but they'll let him drown.
Weird. And Huck feels bad for them.
A little bit, yeah. He even tries to get help for them, though it doesn't work out. Shows his growing empathy.
And then the Grangerfords and Shepherdsons.
Ah.
That whole feud.
Oh, man. Yeah, the analysis presents this as just brutal, senseless violence,
Yeah.
all based on some forgotten tradition and twisted honor. These are supposed to be civilized folks, aristocrats, slaveholders,
Taking guns to church?
and they don't even know why they're fighting anymore.
Nope. Generations of bloodshed, totally illogical. Huck is just sickened by it, calls it ridiculous, illogical.
Gets away from that mess, thankfully, and finds Jim again. The raft's repaired.
And the analysis sees that as symbolic, mending the raft, mending trust, a chance for reconciliation, even after witnessing such horror.
But then they pick up, the Duke and the King.
Yep. The con man extraordinaire. The analysis frames them as total parasites feeding off society's gullibility and maybe its own hypocrisy, too. They seem free because they pretend to be whoever they want, but really they're trapped by their own greed and selfishness. No moral compass at all.
And their scams get pretty bold. Oh, yeah. First, the religious revival scam. The king pretends he's a reformed pirate, needs money for his mission, walks away with, what, $87?
Then the Duke prints that fake wanted poster for Jim.
Right, which the analysis points out is weirdly clever. It lets them travel during the day by pretending they've captured a runaway slave, twisting the whole system.
And the royal nunsuch. Goodness.
Peak Twain satire right there. The king basically does this ridiculous, nearly naked act, and people pay. Then, because they feel ripped off but don't want to look like fools, they hype it up in the next town so others get duped too.
Wow. Society just enabling the scam.
Exactly. The analysis says it's a sharp critique of vanity and how easily people go along with things.
Huck starts to see them for what they are, though.
Yeah, he has that thought. You couldn't tell them from the real kind, meaning like respectable people in society can be just as fake and self-serving. The analysis connects this back to that theme. Social status means nothing about your actual character. Look at Jim Enslaved, but morally, he's the soundest character in the book.
Which really comes into play with the next big scam, right? The Peter Wilkes inheritance.
Oh, this one's bad. They pretend to be the dead man's brothers from England, just cold-bloodedly exploiting the family's grief to steal everything.
And selling off the family's enslaved people, separating them.
Horrifying. And this is where Huck really hits a limit. He says it's enough to make a person ashamed of the human race.
He feels for the victims here, especially Mary Jane Wells.
Right. She's so genuinely good and trusting, it makes it personal for Huck. He can't stand by. So he decides to steal the inheritance money back from the Duke and King and hide it in the coffin.
Risky. And he struggles with lying now, doesn't he?
Yeah, because the victims aren't abstract anymore. They're real people he cares about. Shows real growth from his earlier view on lying.
And then the real brothers arrive, and it all blows up.
Total chaos, mob mentality kicks in. The townspeople who blindly trusted the fakes now instantly turn on the real brothers. They dig up the coffin, find the gold.
And ignore the people who tried to warn them.
Completely. Like Dr. Robinson and Levi Bell, the voices of reason. The analysis highlights this. The mob's irrationality, their rush to judgment, ignoring clear evidence.
Huck gets away in the confusion. But then...
Yeah. He gets back to the raft, relieved, and there they are. The Duke and the King manage to escape too. His disappointment is just crushing. Like, you can't escape the ugliness.
So things are getting pretty desperate for the Duke and King now, I guess.
Yeah, their scams are getting riskier, less successful, and that desperation leads to, well, the ultimate betrayal.
Selling Jim.
The King does it. Sells Jim to a farmer, Silas Phelps, for just $40, using that fake wanted poster the Duke made.
Only $40, after Miss Watson was offered $800.
Exactly. The analysis really stresses that point. It shows the King's utter depravity and just how dehumanizing the act of selling a person is, reducing Jim's value to almost nothing.
How does Huck react? This must just break him.
Completely. He's devastated, crying, blaming himself for ever helping Jim, thinking he did the wrong thing according to society. He even tries to pray, but says no words come. He feels totally lost and condemned.
And this leads to that really intense moment, the letter.
Oh, yeah. So powerful. He actually sits down and writes the letter to Miss Watson telling her where Jim is, because his upbringing, his religion, everything tells him that's the right thing to do. Turn Jim in.
But he hesitates. Thinks about Jim.
He does. He remembers everything they've been through. Jim's kindness, their friendship, how Jim cared for him, how Jim hadn't ever done me no harm. He holds that letter and then he just rips it up.
And says that famous line.
All right, then, I'll go to hell. The analysis marks this as the pivotal moment. Huck consciously choosing to defy society, defy religion, defy everything he's been taught to save his friend, knowing the consequence in his mind is eternal damnation. And the source says he never regrets his choice.
Wow. That's huge. Moral independence right there.
Absolutely the peak of it, choosing empathy and friendship over prejudice. After this, he fully trusts his own gut. He runs into the Duke, who lies about where Jim is, but Huck doesn't buy it. He heads straight for the Phelps farm.
Okay, so Huck gets to the Phelps farm, and they immediately think he's Tom Sawyer.
Yeah, Aunt Sally's expecting her nephew Tom for a visit, and Huck, surprisingly, finds it kind of easy to slip into that role. The analysis notes it's different from the Duke and King's cons. Huck's impersonation isn't about exploitation, it's almost like he understands Tom so well.
And then the actual Tom Sawyer shows up.
Right, and Tom, being Tom, thinks this is all great fun. He's totally on board with helping free Jim.
But his reasons are different, and his plan.
Worlds apart. Huck just wants to get Jim out quick and safe, steal the key, grab the raft, go. Simple, calm. He sees it as a chance for a grand adventure, straight out of his books.
Oh boy, the elaborate, nonsensical plan.
Exactly. Digging with case knives, making ink out of blood, inscriptions on a grindstone, rope ladders and pies. The analysis calls it completely impractical, needlessly cruel, and focused entirely on Tom's idea of style and romance, not Jim's actual freedom or safety.
It sounds ridiculous, and it puts Jim through so much unnecessary misery.
It really does. The analysis argues Tom's plan is its own kind of devaluation of human life, prioritizing adventure over a person's well-being.
And Huck, he kind of goes along with it for a while.
Yeah, the analysis sees this as Huck slipping back a bit. He still looks up to Tom, sees him as this respectable, smart kid, so he follows Tom's lead, partly out of that old habit, maybe still prioritizing Tom's approval over his own better judgment. The source even questions if this part makes the novel structurally a bit weaker because Huck seems to regress.
While all this crazy planning is going on, they see something else happen, right? To the Duke and King.
They do. They witness the Duke and King being tarred and feathered by the townspeople.
Ouch. How does Huck react?
It makes him physically sick. Even though they were terrible people who wronged him and Jim, he feels empathy for them, sickened by the mob's cruelty.
And the analysis is this is another turning point for his conscience.
Yes, seeing that brutal mob justice, even against villains, finally frees Huck once and for all from relying on that socialized conscience. He sees it's a bad gauge, it leads to cruelty and hypocrisy, not real morality. Now he's truly free to follow his own heart, without that nagging societal guilt.
Okay, so Tom's ridiculous plan finally happens, the escape attempt.
And it's chaos, of course. Tom snags his pants, makes noise. Farmers hear them, start shooting wildly into the dark.
Just shooting.
Yeah, the analysis points that out, shooting as they do. Irrational violence focused on protecting property, Jim, as property, not human life.
And Tom gets hit.
Shot in the calf. Not too serious, but enough. And this is where Jim does something incredibly noble.
He could escape right then, couldn't he?
Easily. But he refuses to leave Tom. He stays behind, gives up his freedom to help the doctor tend to Tom's leg. Pure selflessness. Putting Huck's friend first.
Which leads Huck to say that Jim was white inside.
Right. And the analysis immediately flags that line as problematic. Huck means it as the highest praise he can offer within his society's framework, comparing Jim's goodness to the ideal of whiteness. But it tragically shows he hasn't fully escaped the racist assumption that white equals good.
So he sees Jim's humanity, but still uses that flawed lens.
Exactly. The analysis suggests Twain put that in deliberately to show just how deep that ingrained racism went, even in someone as fundamentally decent and changed as Huck.
And the doctor. He acknowledges Jim helped right, but what does he do?
He praises Jim's help, sure, but then he brings Jim back to the Phelps farm in chains.
Wow. Even the good people
are complicit. The analysis really highlights the hypocrisy. Even someone recognizing Jim's humanity still ultimately upholds the inhumane system of slavery.
And the townsfolk want to hang Jim.
Initially, yeah. Their anger is only cooled by the thought that they'd have to pay Jim's owner if they damaged the property. Financial concerns over basic humanity, again.
Unbelievable. And then Tom wakes up and drops the big bombshell.
The most frustrating reveal. Tom finally admits that Miss Watson actually died 2 months ago, and she freed Jim in her will.
He knew all along.
Knew the entire time. He put Huck, and especially Jim, through that dangerous, humiliating farce purely for his own self-indulgent adventure. The analysis really condemns Tom's actions here as incredibly selfish, completely devaluing Jim's freedom and dignity.
That's infuriating. And Jim has one last piece of news for Huck.
Yeah, a quiet, important moment. Jim tells Huck that the dead man back in the floating house, that was Pap. Jim knew, and he protected Huck from seeing it all that time.
Solidifying that father figure role.
Definitely. The analysis emphasizes Jim's consistent care and protection of Huck.
So at the end, Huck's got his money saved, but Aunt Sally wants to adopt him, civilize him.
Yeah. And he's horrified. The analysis points out the difference now. At the start, he just disliked being civilized. Now, after everything he's seen and learned, he understands the deep hypocrisy, the racism, the violence, the conformity that civilization represents for him. He's not just resisting, he sees through it with moral maturity. So after all that, what's the big takeaway? This deep dive into the analysis really shows Huckleberry Finn as this incredibly powerful, sharp critique of 19th century America. It just lays bare the hypocrisy, the senseless rules, the pervasive racism, and the twisted thinking that held up something as awful as slavery.
Yeah, and we've really traced Huck's amazing growth from kind of accepting society's warped views to having the courage to follow his own heart, even if he thinks it means, going to hell.
Yeah.
That relationship with Jim, built on the raft, that becomes the story's true moral center, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Totally contrasts with the world ashore.
Absolutely. And the analysis helped us see those different flavors of freedom. You've got Pap's destructive version, the Duke and King's selfish con artistry, and then the real freedom Huck finds moral independence, living through empathy. The analysis notes it's not just about being free from things. For Huck, true freedom means binding himself to his own moral gut feelings.
And the river and the raft, they're not just scenery. The river as this, wild freedom, and the raft as the space where you figure out how to live together peacefully. That tension is always there.
And Twain's genius, as the analysis points out, is mixing that sharp satire with such gritty realism. He shows you people, whole towns sometimes, being both completely ridiculous and capable of terrible cruelty, often at the same time. It forces you, the listener, to constantly ask, what does civilized even mean? The analysis makes it clear the critique isn't just aimed at the villains, but at the good townspeople, too, with their blind trust and mob violence.
It's definitely not a book with easy answers. We saw how Huck, even after his huge moral leap, still struggles with the language of racism he grew up with, like that white inside comment. The analysis suggests Twain included that to show just how hard it was to escape those deeply embedded ideas.
Which leaves you with a really big question, doesn't it? How much are we all shaped by the societies we live in, even the flawed parts? And what does it really take to break free, like Huck did, and follow your own moral instincts, even when it's hard? He had to make that conscious choice to risk everything.
Yeah. And Huck's final decision, he's not letting Aunt Sally civilize him. He says he's going to light out for the territory. The analysis interprets that not just as heading west, but as striving to stay mentally free, always questioning, always open. So maybe the provocative thought for you is, in a world that can feel full of pressure and hypocrisy, where's your territory? That space where you can be truly free and follow your own heart. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.